World War II was not only a contest of industrial firepower, it was also a war fought in shortages, isolation and improvisation. Soldiers frequently found themselves without proper equipment, cut off from supply, or operating in environments where standard weapons were, well, pretty much useless. In those moments, ordinary objects were repurposed in ways that were never intended. These improvisations were not clever tricks born of creativity alone. They were acts of necessity, shaped by terrain, scarcity, and the brutal reality that survival often depended on adaptation rather than doctrine. Why did improvised weapons emerge when standard arms failed? Frontline units routinely lost weapons to mud, cold, water, or mechanical failure. In partisan warfare and resistance movements, official weapons were scarce or quite often forbidden. Soldiers adapted everyday items not to replace firearms, but to fill gaps when nothing else was available. The lesson here is not about replication, but about understanding how environment and scarcity drive innovation under pressure. How did tools become weapons through altered purpose? Entrenching tools, hammers, and utility knives were among the most commonly repurposed items. These tools were always present, durable, and familiar. Soldiers used them not because they were ideal, but because they were reliable. Historically, this shows how dual-use equipment becomes critical when supply chains collapse. Why were blunt objects favoured in confined environments? Urban combat, trenches and dense forests limited visibility and range. Soldiers sometimes relied on weighted objects or reinforced handles because they required no ammunition and functioned in silence. The historical takeaway is how environment shapes weapon preference, particularly in close quarters. You know, clothing and fabric actually played some rather unexpected roles. Scarves, belts, and webbing, for instance, were sometimes used to modify grip, retention, or even the concealment of standard equipment. These adaptations, though subtle, were surprisingly effective. The broader lesson here, I think, is that small adjustments often matter more than dramatic changes, especially when resources are, well, limited. Now, let's consider why field modifications focused on reliability rather than lethality. Improvised weapons, truth be told, were rarely about maximizing damage. They were really about making sure something worked at all. Soldiers tended to prioritize durability and familiarity above all else. This reflects a broader wartime truth, doesn't it? Reliability under stress mattered far more than any theoretical effectiveness. Moving on, let's talk about how resistance groups adapted household items differently than soldiers did. Civilian resistance, you see, operated under much stricter constraints. Everyday objects absolutely had to remain invisible during inspections, so improvisation was all about concealment and plausibility. This really highlights how context determines not just what is used, but also how openly it can exist. You know, it's interesting to consider why some improvisations disappeared after the war. Well, post-war armies quickly abandoned these improvised methods because, honestly, standardized logistics returned. These hacks, they were never meant to be permanent. Their disappearance, in a way, reminds us that they were really just symptoms of breakdown, not advancements to be celebrated. What modern survivalists often misunderstand about wartime improvisation is, well, pretty significant. Popular culture, you see, tends to romanticize these adaptations, making them seem almost heroic or clever. But in reality they were frankly dangerous, unreliable, and incredibly stressful. Soldiers much preferred proper equipment whenever it was available. The real lesson here is honestly about preparation and redundancy, not improvisation as your first choice. Now, what do these unusual weapon hacks actually teach us today? These stories, let's be clear, are not instructions. They're really warnings about what happens when systems break down. They show how humans adapt under pressure, sure, but also why societies go to such great lengths to prevent those conditions from happening again. Understanding these adaptations helps us appreciate logistics, planning and resilience, rather than glorifying desperation, if you follow me. World War II improvisation reveals, quite strikingly, how ordinary items became tools of survival when no alternatives existed. Studying these moments, I think, deepens our understanding of the war as a profoundly human experience, not just a technological one. If this exploration added a bit of depth to how you view World War II survival and adaptation, do consider subscribing to the channel for more historically grounded content that examines the realities behind the myths. And, share this video with fellow history enthusiasts who value context, accuracy, and the hard lessons over mere sensationalism.